Welcome to Astrid's Tales, and here is today's story. The decision to see a marriage counselor was not a dramatic capitulation, but a quiet, reluctant surrender. After 12 years, my marriage to Leo had become a landscape of unspoken resentments and polite, empty spaces. The easy laughter that once filled our home had been replaced by a strained silence, the air thick with things left unsaid. We were two people sharing a mortgage and a history, but the intimacy, the vital connection that had once been our foundation, had eroded so gradually we barely noticed until we were standing on opposite sides of a chasm. Leo suggested therapy. He presented the idea with a practiced reasonableness that left little room for argument. "We owe it to ourselves, Elara," he'd said, his hand resting briefly on my arm. "We need a neutral third party to help us communicate again." I agreed, not with hope, but with a weary sense of obligation. I wanted to believe we could find our way back. But a part of me suspected we were merely looking for a formal, mediated end. The therapist he chose was Dr. Evelyn Reed. Her office was in a restored brownstone, tastefully decorated in calming shades of gray and blue, with abstract art on the walls and plush, oversized armchairs. Dr. Reed herself was the picture of composed professionalism. She was in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, and a wardrobe of elegant, neutral-toned business attire. Her voice was a low, soothing melody, a stark contrast to the discordant notes of my own anxiety. From the first session, the dynamic was set. Leo, charming and articulate, painted a picture of a man trying desperately to connect with a wife who was increasingly distant and withdrawn. He spoke of my preoccupation with my work as a freelance editor, my emotional unavailability, and my tendency to shut down during arguments. He delivered his points with a gentle, wounded sincerity that was incredibly persuasive. "I just want my wife back," he concluded, his gaze fixed on Dr. Reed. "The woman I fell in love with was so full of life. Now, it's like she's behind a wall, and I can't find the door." I sat there, feeling a familiar, hot wave of defensive anger. His version wasn't a lie, but it was a masterfully edited truth. He omitted his own part, his late nights at the office that had become more frequent, his disinterest in my life, the subtle ways he dismissed my achievements while trumpeting his own. When I tried to articulate this, my words came out halting and clumsy, sounding petty and accusatory in the serene, therapeutic space. Dr. Reed would listen patiently, her head tilted in a gesture of deep concentration. Then she would turn to me. "Elara," she'd say, her tone gentle but firm. "It sounds like Leo is making a real effort to reach out. Can you see how your withdrawal might be perceived as a rejection?" Session after session, this pattern repeated. My feelings of frustration were reframed as an unwillingness to engage. My need for space was pathologized as emotional avoidance. Leo's carefully constructed narrative of the long-suffering husband was consistently validated, while my attempts to voice my own pain were met with probing questions about my role in the conflict. I was encouraged to look inward, to examine my unrealistic expectations of marriage, and to take responsibility for Leo's unhappiness. A partnership requires effort from both sides. "Elara," Dr. Reed explained one afternoon, after I'd described feeling lonely even when Leo was in the same room. "But one person cannot carry the emotional weight for two. Leo feels he's pulling all that weight. Do you think that's a fair assessment?" I would leave those sessions feeling exhausted and confused, my own reality subtly warped. Was I the problem? Had I become this cold, difficult woman he described? The sessions were supposed to bring clarity, but they only plunged me deeper into a fog of self-doubt. I started to believe their version of me. The guilt was a constant, heavy cloak. The first crack in this carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday. I had a dentist appointment across town and left work early. As I was driving home, I saw Leo's car, a distinctive dark gray sedan, parked on a quiet, tree-lined street, a few blocks from Dr. Reed's office. It was an hour before our scheduled session. I thought it was odd, but assumed he'd simply arrived early and was taking a phone call later in the session. Leo mentioned that he'd been stuck in a last-minute meeting and had to race across town to make it on time. He even apologized for being a few minutes late, a detail that was true. I sat across from him, the small, seemingly insignificant lie hanging in the air between us. Why lie about being early? It was a tiny thing, a splinter of unease, but it lodged itself in my mind. My suspicion, once planted, began to grow. I started paying closer attention, not just to what was said in our sessions, but to what wasn't. I noticed the way Dr. Reed's professional gaze would soften almost imperceptibly when it landed on Leo. I noticed the shared, fleeting smiles that passed between them when they thought I was distracted, looking for a tissue in my purse. I observed how she would use phrases he had used in previous sessions, echoing his language as if it were her own objective analysis. The therapist's office, once a place of potential healing, began to feel like hostile territory. The two armchairs we occupied were no longer equidistant from Dr. Reed's. I felt as though mine had been pushed back, while Leo's had been drawn into a tighter, more intimate orbit with hers. I was no longer a participant in a therapeutic triad. I was an outsider, an audience to a private two-person performance. The breaking point came during our 10th session. The topic was intimacy, or our lack thereof. I tried to explain that it wasn't a physical issue but an emotional one. That I found it difficult to be vulnerable with someone I felt so disconnected from. Dr. Reed intervened, her voice laced with a new, sharper edge of impatience. Elara, a man has needs, she said, the words so jarringly cliché they took my breath away. When those needs are consistently unmet, it is natural for him to feel rejected and frustrated. You are essentially punishing Leo for your own emotional issues. Leo looked down at his hands, a perfect picture of wounded masculinity. But I was looking at Dr. Reed. The mask of professional neutrality had slipped, and for a split second I saw something else in her eyes, a flash of proprietary anger. She wasn't defending a generic man. She was defending her man. The thought was so monstrous, so outrageously unethical, that I immediately dismissed it. It was a paranoid fantasy born of my own unhappiness. But the seed had been planted in fertile ground. The lie about the car, the shared glances, the parroted phrases, and now this blatant, unprofessional defense. It was a pattern, and it was pointing to a conclusion I was terrified to face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Leo, his steady breathing a rhythm I no longer found comforting. I slipped out of bed and went to his study. For years I had respected his privacy, but the rules of our marriage felt suspended, if not broken entirely.
His laptop was on the desk.
My fingers trembled as I typed in the password I knew he used for everything, the name of our first dog, Buddy One. It was a testament to our shared history, a password I had known for over a decade. The irony was sickening. The screen blinked to life. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated through his files, my guilt warring with a desperate need for the truth. I found what I was looking for not in his emails, but in the cloud storage linked to his phone. A folder labeled Personal. Inside was a subfolder titled E. I clicked on it. It contained photos. Dozens of them. Photos of Leo and Dr. Evelyn Reed, not in her office, but in restaurants, their heads close together over candlelit dinners. A photo of them laughing, arms linked, walking through a park in the autumn, leaves scattered at their feet. The most damning one was taken in what was clearly a hotel room, a selfie. They were in bathrobes, champagne glasses in hand, grinning at the camera. Evelyn's head was resting on Leo's shoulder. The date stamp on the photo was from a weekend 3 months prior. A weekend Leo had told me he was at a work conference in another city. The air left my lungs in a rush. The screen blurred as a wave of hot, disbelieving tears filled my eyes. It was real. The paranoia, the suspicion, it was all real. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. They had been meeting, strategizing before our sessions. Leo would feed her his narrative, and she, in turn, would use the authority of her position to validate it, to dismantle my confidence, to methodically gaslight me into believing I was the sole architect of our marital ruin. The therapy wasn't a tool for healing. It was the weapon they were using against me. I sank into Leo's office chair, the cold leather a shock against my skin. The initial wave of grief was quickly consumed by a cold, clarifying rage. My pain, my vulnerability, My genuine desire to save my marriage, they had taken all of it and twisted it into a tool for my own psychological torture. They had made me a paying participant in my own betrayal. I did not confront him. I did not shatter the hotel room photo on his desk and demand an explanation. A raw, emotional outburst was what they would expect. It would fit perfectly into the narrative they had created of the unstable, irrational wife. They would use it against me, just as they had used everything else. No, I would not give them that satisfaction. My mind, trained for years to find order in the chaos of language, began to work with a chilling precision. I was an editor. I knew how to deconstruct a narrative, how to find the flaws, how to expose the truth hidden beneath layers of deception. They had written a story with me as the villain. I would now write the epilogue. The next morning, I was a different woman. I greeted Leo with a calm, neutral smile. I made coffee. I talked about the weather. On the outside, I was the same Ilara. On the inside, I was a general preparing for war. My first step was to purchase a recording device. It was a tiny, sophisticated piece of technology, no bigger than a shirt button, with a powerful microphone and hours of storage. My second step was to consult an attorney, not for a divorce, but for a specialized consultation on professional ethics and malpractice. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, listened to my story without expression. Her fingers steepled under her chin. "The affair is a personal matter," she stated when I finished. But the manipulation of therapy sessions, the use of her professional position to inflict emotional distress and collude with one party against the other, that is a serious ethical breach. It could cost her her license. But you need irrefutable proof. Your word, and even those photos, might not be enough to convince an ethics board. They will see a scorned wife. You need to prove what happened inside that room. The recording device felt cold and heavy in my palm as I sat in Dr. Reed's waiting room for our next session. I had discreetly clipped it to the inside lining of my handbag, which I would place on the small table between our chairs. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I was terrified, but my terror was eclipsed by a righteous fury. The session began as it always did. "So, Ilara," Dr. Reed started, her voice a soothing balm of poison. "Last week we were discussing your reluctance to be intimate with Leo. Have you given any thought to what we talked about? About the ways you might be withholding affection as a form of control?" I looked at her, at this woman who had slept with my husband, who had plotted against me, and I played my part. "I have," I said, my voice quiet. I think you're right. I've been selfish." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leo relax. Dr. Reed gave him a subtle, approving nod. The performance had begun. For the next hour, I let them lead me. I agreed with their assessments. I confessed to faults I didn't possess. I apologized for crimes I had not committed. And all the while, the tiny device in my purse was capturing every word, every nuance, every damning, manipulative syllable. I recorded the next 3 sessions. Each one was a masterclass in psychological abuse. With me now playing the role of the penitent wife, Dr. Reed grew bolder. She coached Leo on how to handle my moods. She suggested to me that my own career was a source of insecurity that I was projecting onto my marriage. In one particularly chilling exchange, she and Leo spoke about me as if I weren't even there, diagnosing my issues and planning how they would manage me moving forward. "She needs to understand that her perception isn't always reality," Evelyn's recorded voice would later say. "Cool and clinical. Exactly," Leo's voice agreed. "She gets these ideas in her head. Always has. She's too sensitive." "We'll work on that," Evelyn promised. "We'll help her find a more balanced perspective." Between sessions, I became a detective in my own life. I hired a private investigator, a retired police officer with weary eyes and a methodical approach. He tracked their movements, providing me with a detailed timeline of their affair. He documented their lunch dates, their weekend trips, their visits to her apartment. The evidence mounted, a cold, hard pile of facts that corroborated the recordings and the photos. The final piece of my case came from a deep dive into Dr. Reed's professional history. A public records search revealed that she had been censured by the ethics bored in another state 5 years prior for a dual relationship with a client. She had relocated, changed her name slightly, and started over. She wasn't just unethical. She was a predator with a history, armed with this mountain of evidence, the recordings, the photos, the investigator's report, and the record of her prior misconduct. I went back to Miss Albright. She reviewed the file, her expression grim. "She's done," the lawyer said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "This is not just an ethics complaint. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." My final therapy session was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I walked in feeling a strange, surreal calm. I knew it was the last time I would ever sit in that chair. I placed my handbag in its usual spot. The recorder running, Leo and Dr. Reed began their usual routine, but I held up a hand to stop them. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I'd like to start today." They both looked at me, surprised. "I've been doing a lot of thinking as you've both encouraged me to do," I said, looking from Leo's confused face to Evelyn's cautious one. "And I've come to realize that this process has been incredibly illuminating. I've learned so much about deception, manipulation, and the abuse of power." Evelyn's professional smile flickered. "Elara, that's a very strong language." "Is it?" I interrupted. I reached into another compartment of my purse and pulled out a stack of 8 by 10 glossy photos. I tossed them onto the coffee table in front of them. The top photo was the hotel room selfie. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Leo recoiled as if he'd been burned, his face a mask of pure panic. Evelyn's carefully composed features shattered. For a split second she looked utterly exposed, her eyes wide with horrified recognition. She recovered quickly, her face hardening into a mask of fury. This is an outrageous violation," she stammered, her voice losing its soothing cadence. "Let's talk about violations, Evelyn," I said, leaning forward. "Or should I say, Dr. Reed? Let's talk about the ethical violation of sleeping with your patient's husband. Let's talk about the violation of colluding with him to manipulate me, your patient, week after week. Let's talk about using this room, a place of supposed trust and healing, to systematically gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind." Leo found his voice, a weak, sputtering protest. "Elara, this isn't what it looks like. We can explain?" "Oh, I don't need an explanation," I said, turning my cold gaze on him. "I have one. In fact, I have hours of explanations." I patted my handbag. "I have our last 4 sessions recorded. Every word. Every lie. Every moment you two spoke about me like a problem to be managed." Evelyn stood up abruptly, her face pale. "You have no right. Recording is illegal. Actually, in this state, it's legal with one-party consent," I replied, parroting the words Miss Albright had taught me. And I consented. "But you know what is illegal, Evelyn? Insurance fraud. Billing my insurance company for legitimate therapy sessions that were, in fact, a complete sham designed to facilitate your affair and cause me emotional distress." I stood up then, my own sense of power surging. "And I also know about the censure you received in California before you changed your name and moved here. It seems you have a pattern of this kind of behavior." Her composure completely crumbled. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The brilliant therapist rendered speechless. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice low and steady. "Leo, you will move out of the house tonight. We will proceed with a divorce, and you will not contest a single thing. You will not ask for the house, and you will not ask for a cent of my money. Because if you do, the recordings and photos will become part of the public court record." I then turned to Evelyn. "And you, Dr. Reed, will receive a formal complaint filed with the state licensing board tomorrow morning, complete with audio evidence, photographs, and a report from a private investigator. I will also be filing a civil suit for malpractice and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Your career, the one you built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, is over." I picked up my bag and walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the knob and looked back at the two of them, frozen in their tableau of ruin. "Thank you for the therapy," I said, the words dripping with ice. "It was as I said, incredibly illuminating. I walked out of that office and into the bright afternoon sun, feeling as though I had surfaced after nearly drowning. The fight wasn't over, but the war was won. The following day, Miss Albright filed the ethics complaint. The board launched an immediate investigation, and within 6 months, Dr. Evelyn Reed's license to practice was permanently revoked. My civil suit was settled out of court for a substantial sum. A quiet admission of her guilt. Leo, stripped of his co-conspirator and his leverage, crumbled. He agreed to all my terms in the divorce. I kept the house, my savings, and most importantly, my dignity. The last I heard, he had moved to a different city, his reputation in our community shattered. It took time to heal. The betrayal left deep scars, and I had to learn to trust my own judgment again. But the woman who emerged from that fire was not the same one who had walked into that therapist's office seeking help. I was stronger, more resilient, and fiercely protective of my own reality. I had faced the ultimate gaslighting, a coordinated attack on my sanity, and I had not only survived, I had won. They had tried to write me as the unstable villain of their story. But in the end, I was the one who held the pen, and I had written my own triumphant ending. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, click like and subscribe for more.